So let me go straight to the topic of my discussion today, because I was told I was given 30 minutes or so, but I've got quite a number of slides, so I hope to be able to share with you the gist of my message in this 30 minutes or so. Now, when I started with risk management, because I'm from an accounting firm, right? So the perspective of risk has always been something to be avoided. It's something that has a negative connotation. But over the years, as I work in risk management, I think one of the things that I learned is that risk arises because of change, and change introduces uncertainties. And the reason why change introduces uncertainties is because, humanly, we are genuinely uncertain about the future because we got limited memory, right? We can remember 3 to 4 variables, or at one time over 1 to 2 iterations, right? We love to think in a group, so when there's a clear leader in the group, somehow you find that everybody thinks the same way. And when you want to think about risk, sometimes you've got to be kind of a contrary thinker, right? Because you are looking for things that maybe people have not thought about. Then there's only a limited rationality or limited scope of what we are looking at. So all these are really human problems, and I'm quite sure you have experience it in your own personal life as well as in your own organization, right? Now, this is some quotes which I like. These are quite dated, but if you look back 30 years ago, right? Ken Olsen, who was then the president of Digital Equipment Corporation, who was bought by Compaq in the 90s. For those of you who are old enough like me to remember that, it was the leading, computer system manufacturer after IBM in the 70s, right? This is a guy who said that there's no reason anyone would want a computer in their home, in 1970. And what do we have? I think every one of us got 3 to 4 computers, including our smartphone, right? And we carry a computer around in our pocket nowadays. So you just can't see that much into the future, even though it's just directionally. Then the one that really got away from EDS, right? Ross Perot, who was the founder of EDS, who was a very large global system integrator, who has since been bought by HP, right? His famous comment about Microsoft, right? What do 13 people in Seattle know that we don't? Obviously, we know what they know, and then Microsoft in the 80s and 90s became one of the largest IT company in the world, right? The other one is the one that about FedEx, a Yale University management professor, in responding to Fred Smith's paper proposing reliable overnight service. Smith is the one who went to found FedEx Corporation, right? He said that the concept is interesting and well-focused, but to do better, you can't do better than a C, right? So I think the key to success is basically to fail at Yale, and probably you can be a successful entrepreneur. Right? So these are what human limitation in terms of thinking. And one of the first thing that you must accept about risk management is that you've got to accept all this limitation. There's no perfect risk map that you will come up with that will be able to tell you what are really the high-risk events that impact you with 100% certainty. All we can know about is that there's no certainty about the future. The future has multiple scenarios. And you have to think about all these multiple scenarios and think about how are you adapting to multiple scenarios. Rather than currently we are in Asia, we are thinking that it's a V recovery, right? We had a very severe downturn in 08. We got an equally sharp recovery end of 09 and in 10, right? And we see that, there's no reason for the economy to tank again, right? But are we sure, Are we just planning for V-shaped recovery indefinitely in Asia and basing all our project plans and our business plans on it, or will a W occur? Well, because people in Britain are worried about W, right? They are thinking that they are going to have a double-dip recession in Britain. And what does a double-dip recession in Britain means for us? So I think these are some of the things that when we are in risk management, we've got to accept that life is uncertain. There are a lot of alternative futures. And so what do we do about all these alternative futures? Right? We need to understand what causes these alternative futures. We may not be able to predict exactly, right, what will happen in the future, but we owe it to ourselves to understand what are the factors and the changes that are happening in our environment, in our business environment, in our organization environment, right, in our country environment, that will drive some of this change, that will drive some changes in our life, in our organization, and therefore drive the future in which we operate in. For example, there are changes in technology. How is the mobile revolution going to affect us, in Asia, especially given the very, very sharp adoption in mobile technology around Asia? Is that going to change the way we work, or is not going to have a dramatic effect on the way that we work, right? Changes in customer, Our customers are now getting younger. We are talking about the Y generation. Does the Y generation really have very different characteristics in terms of consumer taste, in terms of behavioral, in terms of skill sets from us, the old fogies from, generation, I don't know what, before X, I don't know what generation that was, but then, are they that different from us, and are they changing, our business world, right? Changes in competitors. The competition changes every day. The way in which our competitors compete with us, right? They have new strategies. They may stumble upon a new way of competing with us that we have not thought of before, and that catches us off guard. So these are some of the things that we worry about. Changes in complementary assets. What used to be very, very important in the past, for example, every company having its own property, its own office, right, is now, in the present day, quite outdated. People talking about asset-light strategy. We want to make sure that we get a better return on invested capital rather than just better profit margin, right? So these are changes in business thinking about what is really valuable, and intellectual property is getting more valuable than tangible property, right? Whatever is intangible can grow quite dramatically. Whatever is tangible can only grow at a 10-20% pace. So how do we restructure our business around intangible assets, around services, around content, right? Around whatever is in our mind that becomes concrete in the form of intellectual property. So these are changes that will drive changes in your strategy. So the first thing that we advise our client to do, and this is on the strategic risk management side, is that firstly, you can't predict the future, but you can anticipate the future, right? What do we mean by anticipating the future? We mean that you can think about several scenarios that can happen, right? For example, in addition to the V-shaped recovery in Asia, we can think about W recovery in Asia, and what does that mean for us, right? We can think about, a drastic event happening, right? And that changes the way that our business operate around the world, right? So these are some of the possible futures that may happen, and we need to then go and make sure that we formulate, strategies, for each of these scenarios that we think is likely to happen. There'll be core elements of the strategy. There'll be contingent elements to that strategy, and therefore we need to understand, what kind of strategies do we need to address each of the different alternative futures that is facing us, and therefore be able to be well prepared when it happens. And then we need to make sure that we accumulate, some of the assets, the skill sets, and the people that we need to execute those strategies we have identified. And we need to be flexible so that we can discard some of the strategies that are not working and move on to strategies that are working. Right? So let me explain a little bit more into, what I mean. Like I say, this is a very, common thing that we all have to worry about from year to year when we do our business planning, right? And I mentioned a lot about we need to make sure that we anticipate a few possible futures that we'll be faced with. The next thing is that after understanding the possible futures, understanding our industry conditions, what is driving changes in our industry and our country and the world economic order, right? Then we need to formulate what we call core strategies. These core strategies are strategies which are relevant to all the possible alternative futures that we think is likely to happen to our company, right? Then we also need to identify what are the contingent strategies. Contingent strategies are strategies which will be very dependent on which scenario is going to be realized in the future. And therefore, you need to be flexible about selecting which contingent strategy that you need to adopt, and that's where flexibility comes in, right? But the core strategies are very common to all your possible scenarios, and therefore you can pursue all this core strategy with confidence that your investment in this core strategy will not go to waste, because it will be applicable to all the possible future scenarios. A possible core strategy could be to upgrade the productivity and the people skill sets of your organization. Well, regardless of what the future holds for you, if people are our greatest asset, as most of us believe, then upgrading the skill sets and productivity of our people is a no-brainer. It's a core strategy, right? But then whether we should expand aggressively or we should expand cautiously may depend on whether it's a V-shaped recovery or a W recovery. And therefore, it will become a contingent strategy for us. And we can only make that final decision when we're very clear, right, whether the V-shape is going to happen or the W is going to happen. Right? And once we have that core strategies and contingent strategies, what we need to do is then we need to make sure that we accumulate the kind of assets. And when we say assets, I mean people, technology, infrastructure, right, partners that you will need in your ecosystem in order to compete. And you want to make sure that, for those assets which are applicable to all scenarios, right, if you have it, you keep and maintain it. If you do not have it, you need to acquire those assets. For those assets which are only applicable to some of your component strategies, you might just want to scale back if you have it, or you might want to take some real options, so that you are flexible enough to take advantage of the situation when it happens. Right? And so what we advocate with a risk management approach to strategic planning or to strategic risk management is a change of thinking from today towards the most likely future, and then you target a certain portfolio that you want and you want to have in order to take advantage of the most likely portfolio. We are saying that the future is uncertain, right? There are multiple alternative paths to the future. What you need to do is to make sure that you have a portfolio of strategies which will allow you to take advantage of any of the possible alternative future. Right? So what I've stated in the past few slides are basically a philosophy, a way of thinking about risk and marrying it to strategic planning, strategic thought leadership, in which risk is as a result of changes, of uncertainties in our world. What I intend to do in the following slide is to talk about how do we build up the capability in our organization so that our people in the organization also begin to adopt the same philosophy, the same way of thinking about risk, so that whenever they are faced with uncertainties, they are able to have some way of identifying the risk factors and coming up with strategies to address those risk factors. All right? And that is what we call enterprise resilience. So for enterprise resilience, I think our definition is basically the ability and capacity to withstand systemic discontinuities and to adapt to new risk environments. I think a lot of our organizations do face a number of shocks every now and then, right? And all we want to do is to make sure that our organization is equipped with the organization capability to bear risk. The organization capability to bear risk is more than just